Guy is in river operations planning, and his work focuses on management of the surface water from seasonal determinations and outlooks to river flow planning and accounting. Does that sound right?
Yep. Thanks, Ruby. Okay, cheers. So like Ruby said, Guy Ortlipp is my name. Thanks for having me here today. I'm going to go through a few things in the water resource space as far as GMW is concerned. So I'll talk a bit about current water availability, what we've had as far as seasonal determinations this season. We'll look at the catchment conditions. We'll sort of build off some of that information that Graham was giving around rainfall this season and how that's translated into inflows to our storages. Just recently we put out our first 2021 outlook, so what we expect seasonal determinations to be next year under a number of different climate scenarios. And I'll also touch on what water use has been like this season and current water ownership. I'm happy for you to fire out questions as well as we go through, and we're starting to look like I'm running over time. Ruby will give me a real one. So to begin with, this is where we currently stand as far as seasonal determinations in our systems. I guess the big one that you'd be concerned with in this part of the world is the Murray seasonal determination there, which is at 57% right now, which is certainly at the lower end of where we'd like it to be by this time of year. The Broken's really struggled, and we haven't had enough water come into the storage this season to be able to allocate anything in that system. The Goulburn, the other big system that we manage, is at 71%. The bottom sort of follows the Goulburn system. It's got enough water and storage that the rules around allocations in that system allow it to sort of keep up with the Goulburn but not go beyond it. The Cannon-Pasby system, just by coincidence, is also at 71%. And then the Bullock system, which is our very small system that sits right at the top of the bottom catchments, had enough water to be at full allocations, both high and low. We've also just added in the New South Wales allocations, which is relevant if you're in the market participating, and things are being tough over there with 0% general security this season. So we've got a couple of plots here for both the Goulburn and the Murray seasonal determinations, just to sort of paint the picture of how we've tracked both this season, but in the seasons that have led to this season, because it's they're these big systems with big storages that, you know, when they're full, you can sort of support entitlements for a couple of years, but it just means as well that it can take a long time to sort of build up that resource as well. So highlighting this year here, which is the 16-17 season, it was quite dry in 15-16 leading up to 16-17, but then turned quite wet in that 2016 winter and spring. So things started off low coming out of 15-16, but then with a wet winter and spring, we saw allocations quickly increase up to 100% sort of around October, which means once we get the seasonal determination to 100%, we are then starting to bank resource for the following year. So the sooner in the season we can get to that 100% mark, the better it is for the following season.
Has that changed? Isn't it 50%? You start putting some away?
Yeah, so there's what we call the early season reserve, which between 30 and 50%, we start to put a little bit aside for the following year. But that only goes a certain way. We're only putting aside, say, 250, 270 GL, which really just allows us to operate the system in the following year. It doesn't get us a long way as far as new allocations to entitlements in the following year. Yeah. So following this through, 16-17 wasn't a bad year, so we started off 17-18, not too bad. Things progressed through 17-18, similar to 16-17, and we got to 100% allocation just a little bit later than we did in 16-17, which again meant we had a reasonable period to sort of start banking resources for the following year. 17-18 started off similar to 18-19, as you can see there, but you know, it was a dry year, and so we progressed a bit slower through to getting to 100% allocation. it was much later in the year, as you can see there. It wasn't till sort of one of our final allocations, so mid-March, that we said, yep, we've got your full 100% buy for this season, but we had very limited time to sort of start putting aside water for the following year. Which leads us into this year where things started off very low. It wasn't a particularly wet, it was a dry winter in the scheme of things. And it stayed reasonably dry through spring, which has meant that things have just sort of slowly crept along this season, that we haven't seen any big increases. And we're still a way off getting to 100% in this year, which means in effect, other than the early season reserve, which was banked between 30 and 50%, we don't have any water set aside for seasonal termination against the titles in next year. So that's the golden system. It's really a similar story in the Murray system, really, where, again, 17 and 18 started off slowly. It wasn't a bad spring, especially in August and September there. You can see things jumped up, got to 100% reasonably early, around October. Started putting aside water for the following year, which meant that opening allocations for 18-19 were not too bad, at just over 40%. Again, 18-19 was a dry year, so it slowed down, got to 100% around December, which gave us a little bit of time to bank inflows, but December, January, February, obviously the dry months. And then we started the season this year at quite a low signal determination. And like we saw in the golden system, it's just slowly crept along through the year with pretty dry conditions. And certainly over the summer it's been very dry with no improvements really through this period here, where our signal determination sort of just flatlined for a couple of announcements there. I guess one thing to note there, if you're looking at the 9-10 year, you can see right at the end of the season, it jumped up from just above 60% all the way up to 100%. And that was back when we had all that flooding up in sort of southeast Queensland and northern New South Wales, which led to the big inflows from the Darling into Menindee, which sort of gave us that big resource kick sort of very late in the season. And that's what led to that big increase there. I guess it's just worth noting that, given that there's a bit of talk about potential flows coming down the Darling from some of the recent rainfall we've seen up there. It's not nearly at the same scale as what we saw back there. And based on rainfall to date, I don't think they're expecting too much to make it down to Menindee. Certainly not to the point where it switched back over into NDBA control and Victoria would get some resource out of it. But it's still encouraging, I think, to see that there's been a bit of rain up that way anyway. Any rainfall, if they get some more heavy rainfall up there, who knows.
In that 2016, did we get anything out of the Darling that year?
I think so, but I can't remember.
The water went into Menindee, but did that give us any benefit, or was that
I think so.
New South Wales?
I think Victoria could get some resource out of that year. Yeah.
That was a pretty wet year.
Yeah.
Even up there.
Because there has to be a certain amount of water in Menindee for Victoria to get a bit out of it, obviously. Because then it drops down to a point where it goes back into New South Wales control and they have the water to manage it themselves. So I think so, but I can't remember exactly. So here's some numbers around inflows into our storages this is up to the end of January. So that's a good thing. And this, when we looked at what Graham was saying around rainfall this season, there aren't really any surprises, I don't think, here that inflows to the storages so it would mean at the dry end, if we look at what we'd expect sort of historically. Dartmouth and Hume, the two big Murray storages, are sort of way down at the dry end of the scale, where for Hume we're saying 9 out of 10 years, if you look at the historic data set, 9 out of 10 years we would get more inflow than what we've got this year. The Eildon hasn't been quite so bad. Still 65% of the average, but sort of that only 3/4 of the years in the historic record you'd expect to get more. A couple of our other smaller storages, Can current wasn't too bad, which means that there's a little bit of water there in the logging system. Enough anyway for it to be able to allocate water to its entitlements in line with what the Goulburn signal determination is. This is, I guess, a chart that sort of just shows that more visually in relation to the Murray system. And it just helps to, again, sort of, as I was mentioning before, these bigger systems, the resource positions really sort of plays out over longer than just 1 year. You can see that here where 18, 19, was a particularly dry year, a lot below the 10-year average, and certainly even further below what the long-term average we expect to get as far as inflow into those Murray storages. And then we've had the follow-up in this season as well, where July wasn't quite as bad as it was last year, but both years have been a fair way below the long-term average, which has led us to this position we're in now, where signal determination is still low on the Murray system, and we don't have a lot set aside for the following year at this point in time. This is just a similar plot for Lake Hildon now, just again to visually show what we were showing in the numbers before. And you can see here the sort of late winter, early spring wasn't too bad for the Lake Hildon catchment, but still below the average, particularly in August and September, which is, you know, it's these spring months where you've had the winter rain and then you get the follow-up spring rain, which generates a lot of inflow. That's when you hope to get your big resource improvements. It wasn't too bad there in August and September, but still below the average. So that was what we were seeing this year. So now moving into what we expect for next year. So we released this just the other day on the 17th. So the early season reserves in both the Murray and the Goulburn system, because they've both got beyond that 50% mark, means that we have set aside that water for the following year, which means that we're well on our way to having enough water to run the system for next year. We still don't have enough water necessarily just, to be able to allocate out to entitlements yet, but we can at least we at least have the water to run the systems, which is a start. So we keep this next point, no additional reserves until after 1 April. So any improvements we get from here up to 1 April will go to this year's seasonal determination increases. It's only after 1 April, which is our last seasonal determination for this season, that any improvements from that point onward then start to get banked for the following year. For the Goulburn system, where we are right now is really sort of a similar position to where we were last year. So just to put it into perspective as far as, you know, outlooks and what to expect for next year. But the Murray system, unlike the Goulburn system, which last year still hadn't got to 100%, the Murray system had. So it had already started to build some reserves for this year, last year, but it's not at that point in this year where we're only still at 57%. The camp has to be in the broken system there. These smaller systems, I guess, with smaller storages on them. The broken system hasn't had any water for this season's allocations, let alone sort of be able to put aside resource for the following year. The camp has to be system as well. There's still any improvements we've been getting there have been going into seasonal determinations for this season. So no reserve set aside for the following year. They don't have an early season reserve rule like they do in the Goulburn-Murray system. And the Loddon system still has enough water set aside in storage that we're saying that under all the climate scenarios for the next year, that it will have enough water that it will be able to be at the same seasonal determination as what we're saying the Goulburn will be at. Because there's a rule there around the Loddon system that sort of pegs them together, if you like, or doesn't let it go beyond the Goulburn system. So now these are the numbers this is the Murray system for what we're saying the next year under the different climate scenarios. There's a lot of numbers there. We used to just sort of have the wet, average, dry, and then the extreme dry scenario. But we've added these other ones in, this above average and below average in particular. You can see, for example, under this average condition here, by mid-February, we're saying we'd get to 100%. But under the dry, which is sort of your 9 and 10 scenario, we're saying you'd only get to 45. So there's a lot that can happen between 45 and 100%, obviously. So we've added in that below average, which is pretty much halfway between an average and the dry scenario. It's like a 7 and 10 climate scenario, and that gives us the 87% there by the end of the season. Probably also worth noting, we really need to get sort of average conditions from here on to the end of this season, the start of next season at 1 July, to be able to have an open season determination for our first announcement for 2021.
Just when you say that 7 in 10 dry, that's 7 in 10 that will get better than that. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. So if you think about over historic record, what all the different inflow total scenarios could be, you would sort of rank them from the lowest to the highest.
Yep.
The 7 and 10 means that you'd be at that point, sort of at the bottom end, bottom half, where 70% of the years would be wetter than what you're getting in that year.
Yep. Yep.
That's one way to.
Yep.
So they're the Murray numbers. If we were to get a year similar to what we've had this year, that's probably the likely outcome for next year. Is a way to put some context around these numbers as well, or relate it to what we've seen this year.
So again, on those odds, what's dry? Is that 7 in 10 that will get better than dry?
So dry is the 9 and 10, so it's like
Yeah.
at that sort of 10th percentile. So yeah, 90% of years would be wetter.
Yeah.
And if you think back to the other chart I had there on the hume inflows, they were about the 90%
Yeah.
mark as far as inflows this season. Hence why if we get the same conditions this year as next year, we get around that 45% number there.
How many years is that over that you work the percents?
So the historic record has it's about 120, a little bit over 120 years of
Is that relevant anymore?
Yeah, with climate change, I guess the question is what we've seen
The
historically.
previous speaker said it's changed,
Yeah,
and you're still going on 120 years.
so it's a good point. So, so the department put out some guidelines around this not too long ago, I think a couple of years ago, around this question of do we just look at the last 120 years of record to give us an indication of what to expect? And what they've done now is they've actually we adjust the inflows historically for projections into the future. So in effect, what has happened is they say it's really the period from 1975 up to now is probably a more indicative expectation of what to get when you're looking back at history. So we still use 120 years of data, but it's scaled down to a more recent period in history. And there's different opinions around that, and how people interpret these numbers and this kind of thing. But I think the thinking is that we can't just look at the last 120 years as a good indicator or as the best indicator as what to expect for the next few years.
And on the previous slide, you had our allocation. This year closes the 1st of April, like rain that falls after the 1st of April goes into next season. Well, that used to be later than that, didn't it? Used to be at least rain.
Certainly in my time, 1 April's always been the last one.
Because to me, that advantages perhaps the environment a little bit and perhaps horticulture. More likely to carry water over the system. Because if that Darling ever ran again it often runs later in the autumn. I can remember it was one of those years, probably way back in the 1900s, that we got allocated water in the end of April, and not many people could use it, but
Right. Yeah.
And those that did regret it.
someone remembers better than me.
So and I guess things have probably changed with things like carryover since
But
then.
that's probably assumed. Well, you probably can forget about getting water from the Darling, but I just think perhaps that's a bit early to knock off first season, the 1st of April. I'm not sure if used to be 1st of May or something like that.
Particularly given now that people do have the carryover option, so anything they get allocated late in this year but don't want to use this year can carry over to next year, is that?
Yeah, well, a lot of croppers still want to pre-irrigate.
Sure, yeah.
If they got anything up to the 15th of April, they could easily use in that season.
Yeah.
When that late allocation took place, there wasn't any option to carry over on the Victorian system.
Yeah. Yeah, which would have meant that, it pretty much would have all just gone back into the general pool at 1 July and gone into higher allocations at 1 July. Yeah. Okay. So, same numbers, but for the Goulburn system this time. Again, the red arrow is a repeat of this year. What we'd expect to be next year is around the 60% mark, so somewhere in between that dry and below average scenario there. But all we need is dry conditions pretty much between now and the start of the season, 1 July, and we'll be able to allocate something 1%. So this chart just shows delivery-wise now. So this is GMW deliveries this year. There's probably no surprise there. So the red line we're looking at here now from 1920, but it's quite a bit flatter compared to more recent years, which are all these years above it. Right, so the only years that are low up there, well, the one that stands out is from these, the 10-11 seasons lower, but that's because it was so wet that no one really needed to use water. And then some of those years sort of coming out in the millennium drought where, again, water availability was quite low. So just quickly on current water ownership, people like to know, in terms of who's owning the water and how much is being used today and what's available. So right now in the Goulburn system, Murray system for private owners, which we're saying private is basically just not the environment and not urban water corporations, everyone else, that there's about 439 GL there right now, which is just what's compared to what was carried over into this year and what they had as new allocation, what's being used and traded, that's what's left now. It's similar to what it was last year in the Murray system. So there was higher allocations last year, but also higher use. And we ended up somewhere about the same spot. But the environments use a lot more of their water this year. So they have less water available this time compared to last year. In the Goulburn system, 350 available right now, which is about 100 GL less than what they had at this time last year. They've just used more of what they've had available to them compared to the Murray. And the environment, same as the Murray, they've used a lot more of their water this year compared to what they've had as new allocation, so they've sort of drawn their holdings a bit more.
So they've traded out more than they've used. Is that right?
So you can see that the trade in and the trade out are about the same. There's different environmental water holders and they have to move water to each other to be able to use them in certain parcels. So a lot of that is just sort of trade with each other in effect. Is why those numbers are why they are. But the net position there is not much at all.
Guy, did you say you mentioned there's less water in the Goulburn system now than there was this time last year, irrigation available water. Did you say there's also less on the Murray compared to this time last year?
So in the Murray, it's about the same. That 439, I think the number last year was, again, around that 400 and something mark.
Yep.
So maybe just by coincidence it's about the same. That again, they got allocated more, but they use more. Whereas in the Goulburn, allocations have been lower, but they just use more of the holdings. I don't know, there might just be different, what people holding Goulburn water are thinking a bit differently around carryover for next year and this kind of thing. Yeah. I'll move on because I don't know time. So just touching on this, there's a trade review that's going on. It's being led by the Victorian government, which is a review of the Goulburn to Murray trade. It's been driven by, we've seen very high flows have to go down the Goulburn River the last 2 summers. And this has led to high degradation of the banks and the lower Goulburn River and damage to the environment. So they want to change the rules to stop that from happening longer term. So that requires a new operational rule which will limit the amount of water we can push down the lower Goulburn in the summer months. And then there'll be a corresponding change to the trade rule to bring into alignment how much trade can occur, given that there's going to be this restriction on our ability to deliver the flows. So there's a consultation paper on this trade rule that's due out very soon, and then public consultation is expected to occur through March.
So the same thing was said this time last year about not letting a lot of flow go down the Goulburn in the summertime, and yet it's happened again this summer, you say?
It has, but not to the same extent. So the minister
There's
asked...
less water to afford to have.
Well, it was actually more the ministers sort of stepped in coming into this summer and said, after what we've seen last summer and then what we're seeing as far as trends in the market, we can't have this continue to occur because the lower Goulburn is just going to get degraded to the point where it might not recover to where it is.
What the minister said wasn't enforced, was it? There seemed to be still a lot of water going down there from what she said.
Still more than what they'd like, but less than last year. As far as deliveries of water down the lower Goulburn.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just quickly on bushfire impacts, people have been asking this question, given that we've seen bushfires in the catchments. For our part of the world, large areas of the human ovens catchment got burnt. There is potential for this to impact on runoff into our dams, but it's hard to quantify exactly runoff impacts depending on the type of vegetation. So with mountain ash, apparently as that regenerates, it takes up a lot more water that would otherwise run off as inflow. But of the catchments that have been burnt, only roughly 10% of this has been mountain ash vegetation, so we don't expect that to have too much of an impact. It's probably more of a relevant issue for our urban water corporations who have water treatment issues with sort of filtering out all the ash and sediment that comes from all the water that runs off these catchments. So just to wrap up, no seasonal determination this year, less than 100%. It's only the fourth time it's happened against high reliability watersheds. It's the seventh time for the Goulburn since 2002-03. Before then it hadn't happened, so I guess it's over the last almost 20 years. We've seen it happen 7 times. GMID deliveries have been low this season, which given lower water availability isn't too much of a surprise. And 2021 signal determination outlooks are now out for people to start thinking about next season. So happy to take any questions about any of that.
I noticed on the Murray system that the environmental trade-ins versus trade-outs, so there was like 950 gigalitres traded out and only 200 or something traded in.
Yep.
What's going on there?
So to move water, environmental water from Victoria and New South Wales, I think, down the river into South Australia, it's done by trade, just to track the water through the system and so that the states know when it's shifted from one state to the next. So that explains why it's such a big trade out figure there, because it's how they move the water down the river. I mean, physically the water moves down the river, but in an accounting sense, it's how it's tracked. Yeah.
So that far exceeds any irrigation usages or, so you're operating the system basically for environmental flows. So all keeping all your allocations and stopping allocating to irrigation so you can operate the system is all about South Australian saltwater lakes that get washed out.
Yeah, I mean, so the environmental water holders hold a lot of water now. They have big water holdings. Yeah, at certain times of the year more than others, what we're doing on the rivers as far as how much water is going down the river will be dictated a lot by what the environmental water holders are targeting as far as using their water to meet ecological outcomes. So, for example, spring.
So how are they trading that much water through the Barmah choke?
So it's not. It's being used. The water, so it gets released from the upstream storages like Hume, flows down through the Barmah choke. So physically it's moving down the river, and it's just an accounting.
Yeah, so are they subject to the same trade restrictions as well?
Yes.
So how can they trade that much water if the choke's been closed?
Well, the water's
season?
already below the choke, I guess, is when the trade's occurring into South Australia.
Someone's going via the Mulwala Canal.
Yeah,
Yeah, just to tease New South Wales.
New South Wales hasn't got any water to use, but their canals are being used to take water to South Australia. They don't see the funny side.
No. No, I mean, yeah, I mean, this Barmah choke issue has always been there, and not just for the environment, but I guess just for the system operations as a whole, trying to move water most efficiently to where it needs, or where people want to use it, which is in the Lower Murray area. Yeah, they use all the options that the guys have in place.